Hi, everyone. What I'm presenting for you today is kind of an extended version of the presentation I gave at ChLA 2021. My paper, The Bigger Picture, the Representation of Female Characters in Jim Kay's Illustrated Harry Potter Books. So what I've done is kind of given a few more details, maybe added back in those paragraphs that I had to cut for time's sake for the conference. But I wanted to be able to share this with all of you because I know there are people who are interested. So without further ado, I will jump right in. I do want to make kind of the caveat that if you're familiar with my work, you'll recognize its title. It was published earlier this year, and I will link the article in the description of the video. But this paper was written before all of the J.K. Rowling tweets from last June, and I just want to make it very clear that I in no way, shape, or form condone her language and her transphobic views, and I think it's terrible and disgusting. But I do think that with that in mind, we do have the opportunity to continue to think critically about how women are viewed in the wizarding world and in our commercialization of it. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to add one more thing for us to think about. So here we go. When J.K. Rowling wrote of her boy hero, Harry Potter, he'll be famous, a legend. Every child in our world will know his name. She could not have known how true that statement would be over 20 years later. The Harry Potter series has found massive commercial success and has gained the attention of scholars and critics in the fields of feminist studies, animal studies, trauma studies, children's literature, queer studies, and beyond. Now, Scholastic has opened the series to a new field of studies, illustrations. This presentation will focus primarily on Jim Kay's depiction of, and sometimes lack thereof, Hermione Granger in the recent illustrated Harry Potter books. I argue that Kay's portrayal of Hermione diminishes or removes Hermione's active role in the novels and reinvents her as a passive, codependent character, mostly devaluing her role in the books. These images on screen probably look familiar. To the left, you have the 7 book jackets from the American editions of the Harry Potter series, and to the right, you have the chapter illustrations for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone if you're anywhere but America. So the original UK and American editions of the Harry Potter books weren't devoid of illustrations. Illustrator Mary Grandpré, who worked on all 7 installments of the first American editions, incorporated these pencil sketches at the beginning of each chapter. These simple sketches on a white background illustrate key moments from the chapter, such as these ones circled here. So Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived, is illustrated with a baby Harry wrapped in a blanket. Chapter 3, Letters from No One, is illustrated with a fireplace full of letters. Chapter 10, Halloween, is illustrated with a troll holding a giant club. And Chapter 12, The Mirror of Erised, features Harry in front of a large mirror. In these examples that I've just listed, the headpieces directly correspond to Rowling's chapter titles. However, Grandpré's headpieces don't always match. There is an element of illustrative freedom that she has taken. So an example of that is here, chapter 6, which is titled The Journey from Platform 9 3/4, features a frog and a picture of Albus Dumbledore when you might expect it to be, the Hogwarts Express. Chapter 7, right beside it, actually features Peeves the Poltergeist when you might assume it would be the Sorting Hat because the title of that chapter is The Sorting Hat. So here we see Grandpré taking that kind of illustrative freedom, and that's going to be important to note as we think about illustration studies as a whole and where illustrators take creative freedom and where they kind of stick to the book. So keep that in mind when we start talking about Jim Kay, who we're going to talk about right now. So the illustrator who's been charged with this monumental task of bringing Rowling's Wizarding World to life in an official illustrated edition is Jim Kay, pictured here holding Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Kay's award-winning work includes illustrations for Patrick Ness's A Monster Calls, published in 2011, for which he won the Kate Greenaway Medal in 2012, which is like a huge illustrations award. Kay works with a lot of multimedia techniques and materials when doing his illustrations, which kind of lends itself really nicely to the detailed illustrations and the detailed worlds that he helps create. So in the Harry Potter books alone, you see like charcoal, pencil, oil paints, watercolor, all of these different techniques, along with kind of odd materials like wallpaper, wax, that thing you used to do as a kid, where you would put a piece of paper over something and then rub over it to get the design. He does that too. So all of these things he incorporates into his books, which gives them like a multimedia, almost textured feel. Here, we'll show you an example of some of his work from A Monster Calls. Note the line work, his stark black and white contrast, his shading. All of these details lend themselves really well to the rich world of Harry Potter. And sometimes Kay is able to creatively expand on Rowling's world. For example, in his illustration of the magical wizarding shopping district, Diagon Alley, Kay adds shop fronts that were not mentioned in Rowling's text, such as Blinkhorn the Bootmaker and Petty Chaps Shirts for Squirts. I think part of the success of Kay's illustrations is in his ability to embody the spirit of Rowling's world and to create illustrations that match its quirky level of liveliness. Here what we have is Diagon Alley that I just mentioned. It's a 2-page spread from the Illustrated Sorcerer's Stone from 2015. The storefronts are labeled with a lot of signs. Some of them are familiar, like on the right, we see Flourish and Blots, that's the bookstore. And here on the left, I've zoomed in on that picture a little and circled some of those new stores. Like you can see Blinkhorn Bootmaker, and then over to the side, there's Lucky Charms Fortune Talismans. So those are just a few of the extra details that Kay has created for his illustrations. But now I want to take just a moment and shift from source material into a little bit of theory to kind of contextualize where I'm coming from. And don't worry, those of you who went to grad school with me know I am not a big theory person, and even I think that this bit is really fun and eye-opening. So when reading illustrations, it's important to understand the subconscious effect that illustrations have on how readers interpret characters. Scholars like William Moebius and Molly Bang have developed Picturebook codes that can help readers recognize how illustrative decisions can subconsciously attribute different traits to a character. Particularly important to the discussion of Hermione today is Moebius's principle of left versus right and Bang's principle of positionality. Moebius recognizes the left page versus the right page as a difference of agency, saying that a character on the left page is, quote, likely to be in a more secure, albeit potentially confined space than the one shown on the right, who is likely to be moving into a situation of risk or adventure. Bang also attributes different qualities to different spaces on the page. The top half of a picture is, quote, a place of freedom, happiness, and power. The bottom half, quote, feels more threatened, heavier, sadder, or more constrained. And the center is, quote, the point of greatest attraction. And the emotional response that both Moebius and Bang recognize can affect the reader's reaction to certain scenes and characters. So illustrators need to be aware of how, when, and where they illustrate characters. Kay's illustrations utilize the aforementioned Picturebook codes, and whether intentionally or not, they project problematic messages about Hermione that support some of the negative feminist criticism of her character. So while only the first 4 illustrated Harry Potter books have been published as of today, a pattern of missing or diminished women is already emerging in Kay's work. And I have made a chart to kind of explain that. Despite being part of Rowling's Golden Trio, Hermione's featured in fewer illustrations than Harry or Ron. And there are other times when she's almost omitted completely, as kind of indicated by this chart. So Harry is illustrated 53 times in the first 4 books with 27 individual illustrations. Ron is illustrated 20 times with 6 individual illustrations, and Hermione is only illustrated 16 times across the first 4 books. And in 12 of those, she's pictured with Harry, Ron, another male character, or a group scene of some sort. One potentially positive thing to note is that in 10 of those 16 illustrations, she is on the right-hand page or the right-hand side of the page, as if she's moving to the right. And for a comprehensive tally, just for you numbers people, Hermione's 16 illustrations account for 3.4% of the 471 illustrations in the series so far. Comparatively, Ron accounts for 4.25% and Harry for 11.25%. So here's the chart. I did all the counting, so you don't have to, but I will just give you a very brief and unofficial methodology that I went through when I was doing this counting. I only counted illustrations that took up a significant portion of the page. So any kind of decorative borders or like tastefully ink splotched backgrounds didn't count as an illustration. Just pieces of candy doodled in the corner didn't count as an illustration. And if we got a 2-page spread, I counted that as 2 images. So that's a little bit of the math I was counting. But as you can see, it's definitely not equal. And for a trio, there's definitely some bias. Understanding the positive role that Hermione plays in the Harry Potter novels helps readers understand the significance of an absent or passive Hermione in Kay's illustrations. A 1999 study by Patricia Hine and Christine Inkster, which would have been contemporary to the original publication dates of the Potter novels, examines strong female characters in contemporary children's literature. While their study specifically looks at Karen Cushman's 1996 novel, The Ballad of Lucy Whipple, the pair lays out 6 key factors to determine whether or not a character should be considered strong. Personal traits such as perseverance, courage, intelligence, spirit, resourcefulness, and independence. Issues that are of importance to the character, how the character solves problems, the character's relationships to others, how the character departs from traditional stereotypes, and whether or not the character provides a voice for those who are often unheard. Using Hine and Inkster's study, readers can see how Hermione fits several of these criteria of a strong female character. For example, we know she's brave because of her placement in Gryffindor House, which is then supported by her actions throughout the series. We know she's intelligent because that's kind of the basis of her whole character, but Professor Lupin also calls her, quote, the cleverest witch of her age. We know she seems to become interested in social justice by books 3 and 4, when she rescues Sirius and Buckbeak from execution and starts the Society for the Protection of Elfish Welfare. And we can unpack whether or not the latter is performative activism later. And we know that she has quite a knack for solving problems, usually involving the library, but sometimes just by setting a professor on fire. Looking at Kay's illustrations, however, it's not clear that Hermione is a strong female character, because many of her most active moments never make it into the illustrations, such as freeing Harry and Ron from the Devil's Snare and solving Snape's potions puzzle in Sorcerer's Stone, brewing the Polyjuice Potion in Chamber of Secrets, or campaigning for Spew in Goblet of Fire. So there's a lot that we don't see. The things that we do see, as we'll look at here in a minute, are often her mistakes. So we don't see her brewing the Polyjuice Potion, but we do see when she gets accidentally turned into a cat because she plucked the wrong hair. So what am I getting at? Why does it matter? When do we get to talk about Hermione? So glad you asked. I want to focus on Hermione in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. We could go on and on and on about her appearance in the first couple books, but I think there's some really good key points in the 3rd installment. So Prisoner of Azkaban was originally published in 1999, and the illustrated edition was published in 2017. And honestly, the cover is kind of iconic. So both Cliff Wright's first UK edition and Mary Grandpray's first American edition prominently feature Hermione riding on Buckbeak alongside Harry. And so does the Danish edition and the Finnish edition and the French edition, Italian edition, Dutch edition, Spanish edition, the Ukraine edition, the Japanese edition, and the Thai 20th anniversary edition. In fact, of the 32 illustrated covers, the 11 pictured here all feature Harry and Hermione on Buckbeak, and 14 feature Hermione in some way. But Kay replaces this classic image with an image of Harry and the night bus shown here. Hermione's absence from the cover may not be cause for immediate concern, but it does set the tone for the rest of the book, in my opinion. One key moment where Kay's illustrative choice is particularly harmful to Hermione is when she and Harry encounter the Dementors at the lake. Kay draws Hermione unconscious and half obscured at the bottom of the page, while Harry bravely casts the Patronus charm that saves both their lives. And I've included that illustration here for you for reference. Remember that according to Bang, quote, the bottom half of a picture feels more threatened, heavier, sadder, or more constrained. And this is a pretty accurate description of an unconscious 13-year-old. But my main critique of Kay is why he's chosen this instance. Rowling's text does confirm that Hermione faints because of the Dementors, but this continues the theme that I was talking about from earlier books of illustrating her at her moments of weakness. Kay paints Hermione in an Ophelia-esque manner, on her back, eyes closed, arms across her chest, and that connotates a fragility and frailty that's not typically associated with Hermione, as the earlier discussion shows. The lake scene in Kay's illustration is also one of the few times that Hermione's pictured on the left page. Depicting Hermione unconscious at the bottom of a left-hand page, Kay represents her as little more than an object that Harry must protect. But it aligns with the text, so we can't be too mad, right? Well, for me, it's just a piece of the bigger puzzle. In the chapter Hermione's Secret, also in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Kay only illustrates Hermione once in the illustration pictured here. In this scene, she's terrified, gripping onto Harry on Buckbeak's back, uttering, "Oh no, I don't like this. Oh, I really don't like this." In a chapter where Hermione's intellect and problem solving is supposed to be revealed, Kay diminishes her to a scared, helpless child who needs to be rescued. Neither illustration we've just looked at accounts for the careful planning and control that Hermione shows throughout Azkaban by balancing an overload of classes, using time travel, and by saving Sirius and Buckbeak, which all of this seems to contribute to Kay's pattern of illustrating and drawing attention to Hermione's most passive moments, as opposed to the moments where she does kind of come in and save the day. Very quickly, I want to take a minute to talk about Ginny Weasley, since she was actually the inspiration for this project in the first place. It was upon flipping through my illustrated copy of Chamber of Secrets, looking for pictures of Mrs. Norris for completely unrelated reasons, that I noticed that Ginny Weasley is not illustrated in that book at all. And if you know the story, you know that Ginny plays a crucial role in that one, not just as Ron's kid sister who has a crush on Harry, but it's her kidnapping that ultimately leads Harry to the Chamber of Secrets to face Tom Riddle, slay the basilisk, destroy the diary that ends up being a Horcrux. But as book fans will tell you, Ginny is more than a plot point. Rowling notes that she, quote, seems very prone to knocking things over whenever Harry enters a room, at first. But after the second book, Ginny progressively plays a more important role in each new installment. She starts the series as a nervous child and grows into, quote, an achiever for her athleticism, her popularity, her intelligence, and her beauty, according to Meredith Cherland. By ignoring her presence in the first books, Kay does not allow room for Ginny's character arc over the course of the series, and paints her as a static rather than a dynamic character. A second troubling point about Ginny's representation is that because of the illustration's placement, it connects Ginny unfavorably to romance. This portrait is from Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. It is the first time that we see Ginny's face in the entire series. And so remember that she is 13 here. While Ginny's portrait encompasses the entire left-hand page, on the right-hand page, she, Harry, and Ron have a conversation about dates for the Yule Ball. And she admits to them, I can't go with Harry. I'm going with Neville. In their desperation to maintain, or at least not worsen, their social status, Harry and Ron treat their female friends as pawns that can be easily moved around and paired off with either of them. And Kay's placement of Ginny's large, colorful, eye-catching portrait directly beside this conversation supports a reading of, we're going to associate Ginny with just being somebody's girlfriend, with just being this kind of arm candy that they can tout around, and not really having any say in who she's dating. Which, again, if you know Ginny's story, that becomes an issue circa book 6. So that is what we're left with of Ginny Weasley. And I'm personally very interested to see how her storyline continues in the next illustrated editions. But in conclusion, I will leave you with 2 of Hermione's 4 individual illustrations. Both of these happen in book 1. There's no arguing that J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books are a cultural phenomenon, attracting attention from scholars across a variety of countries, backgrounds, and disciplines. As the illustrated editions continue to be published, other female characters can enter this conversation that we've started today. Characters like Cho Chang, Harry's first love interest, Luna Lovegood, his quirky friend, and Nymphadora Tonks, the feisty Auror. More data will also become available on Hermione Granger and Ginny Weasley, and the adult women that I didn't have time to talk about today, like Minerva McGonagall. As female characters take on bigger roles in the books, their participation will, ideally, be reflected in Kay's illustrations and hopefully show their character growth. Continued attention to Harry Potter is a testament to the depth and richness of Rowling's universe, with all of its flaws, strengths, and complexities. And this attraction will keep readers young and old returning to the page, and now the picture, for years to come. But here's some things for us as active readers, teachers, parents, and scholars to be thinking about. Do the first 4 illustrated Potter books indicate a pattern of women only being illustrated in their moments of weakness or passivity? As romantic relationships become more important to the story in books 5, 6, and 7, will Kay's illustrative tendencies render women objects of affection more so than independent or competent characters? And if so, does this undermine the significance these female characters play in the story and the effect that they have on new readers, especially young girls? So those are the questions I'm going to leave you with. There are just a quick works cited page for the things I've cited here. And I thank you so very much for listening. I was really excited to share this work with you, and I hope you're just as frustrated and confused as I was when I started this project. So thank you all again so much. Have a great rest of your day.